The Greeks were famous, like Plato and Aristotle and Parmenides. Philosophers, Greek philosophy. Yes. Greek philosophy was a big thing. So some of them may have been sort of functional atheists that practiced a smattering of paganism, enough to satisfy the city officials or whatever that they wouldn't get killed. But I feel like, I hope you're already seeing, there's all kinds of questions about first century life in Turkey that I kind of want to know. Like, I wonder what all these things were. What did their houses look like? Were they different than houses in Israel? Because at the beginning I showed you a picture of some houses in Israel and how they built them. But I don't know if Greeks did things differently. I would suspect they did, because they weren't Jewish. And Turkey would have more trees than Israel does, so much more things were probably made out of wood. You have me curious. This is why I get in trouble. But I hope that it piques your curiosity as well, because it helps sort of fill out the story. Otherwise, you have Paul and Barnabas, who are sort of ghosts, and they walk around and they talk to other ghosts, and they preach to other ghosts, and they don't do anything human, and they don't stub their toes, and they just sort of float from one town to another. Right? We have to turn them into people. At least I think so. Sometimes it seems like a sad existence because they didn't have chocolate chip cookies. I wonder what they did for dessert. I wonder if they had sugar. Because, I wonder what you'd get sugar from in the ancient world. Yeah, like sugar cane is a big one. Honey and bees, that was big.
Dates are a form of sugar.
Dates would have sugar in them, but I wonder if they actually got sugar out of things or not. If someone figured out, like beets, I think even now they cut them up and they boil it. And then somehow the sugar must remain in part of the liquid that they separate out. There's all kinds of things. I'm surprised you guys aren't all pulling out your phones now like young kids would be, looking at what are all these things? So there's some points of contention with the Jews. And then it notes what has become kind of a theme in the book of Acts, that disbelieving Jews come to Iconium, and they come from Antioch. They're sort of like, wait a minute, Paul and Barnabas, they're going to other synagogues. They're preaching bad things. We're going to go and warn the synagogue. And they come and they get there, and sure enough, they find Paul and Barnabas preaching, and they get all huffy and hot under the collar, and they want to throw them out again. It's probably, part of it is accepting a new form of belief. One of the most dangerous things, I think, is getting comfortable where you're at. And this happens more as you age. This is a struggle for a lot of people. You get comfortable with where you are, and you don't really want to move. In science, they call it inertia. The tendency of things to stay where you put them. And if you think about this in religious faith, some of us would easily say, well, if Paul and Barnabas came, I would believe them. Would you? I mean, one of the scariest possibilities is that Paul and Barnabas would come today, or someone would come today preaching a real message, and you would say, I'm kind of comfortable where I'm at, and that just doesn't sound like what I grew up with, so go away. That could be a huge piece of the objection to Paul and Barnabas. And there's a danger to it. There's a danger to inertia. Sometimes you have to upset the apple cart. Jesus talks about comforting the afflicted, and I almost wish he would have added afflict the comfortable. Because when we get too comfortable, we're not as open to what is happening around us. And it's very, very possible that the major point that upset the Jews was that Paul and Barnabas are talking about something different. This isn't traditional Judaism. And if you think about this today, it happens all the time with things like praying out loud or reading the scriptures or doing Bible study together at your home. Well, that's not the way I grew up. So what? That's not the question. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? You know, there might be a lot of things that you didn't have when you grew up, and you sure as peaches are happy about them now. Like, refrigeration has come a long way, that you can have a chest freezer and buy meat when it's on sale and then make it later. Or you can have an angry freezer. That freezer burns everything you put in it and makes you upset. Lots of you didn't grow up with air conditioning, and you now, I bet, wouldn't trade it for the world. If it was like, there's all kinds of things. And so in some ways we've gotten used to adaptation and technology. I mean, the pandemic happened and there was all kinds of stuff with COVID that was really awful. But one of the things that was really, really life-saving for a lot of people was video chat. So maybe you didn't go and be with your kids or your grandkids as often as you did before, but they could pull up their phone or their iPad or whatever and you could video chat. You might not realize that in large part that wasn't possible 5 years ago. That wasn't widespread 5 years ago. And that's not even that long. And so they stay there for a considerable amount of time. God works signs and wonders through them. This means that there are miracles happening. And there's a division in the town. Now this is interesting because you would think that the division in the town is between who? Jews and Gentiles. But that's not what it says. What does it say?
Both of them are believers.
The division in town is between Jews and Gentiles who reject the message of Paul and Barnabas, and Jews and Gentiles who accept it. That the division isn't between Jews and Gentiles, which we would think, but it's actually between people that are listening to Paul and Barnabas and people that aren't. Or at least people that want to injure them and throw them out, and people who don't. Some of them are probably like, so what? They preach at the synagogue. How does that affect you? Those people existed in the ancient world too, just as much as they exist in the modern world. So they're nearly stoned. Now, this should tell you something. That they flee to surrounding cities, that difficulties are seen as a way of propelling them onward, that God is leading them onward. But could you countenance the possibility that they were scared? When you were reading this, did you imagine Paul and Barnabas scared? You did? If you did, you're better at reading than I am, because I usually don't. It's like, no, God's calling them to move on to these other towns, so they just sort of march out of town. Maybe they had to sneak out during the night, dressed as women. That would probably be considered immoral in the ancient world. You could probably get stoned for doing that. Dressing as a different gender than you were. But again, they're nearly stoned, and that has to be a point of contention. That's more than just people don't like what you're saying. I mean, I don't know, if you guys were threatening to stone me, I'd probably shut up and sit down. And not say anything else, right? Note to self, if people bring rocks next week, I know what happened. They also have to deal with frustrations and challenges, setbacks. If you were preaching and it was going well, and then some people threatened to kill you and you had to leave, you would probably be upset and frustrated that these are challenges, that there's human resistance happening, and there's not an easy prescription for what you do with it. It's just a difficulty. They go to Lystra. This is another city in central Turkey. modern day Turkey. And here they heal a crippled man. This is like earlier in Acts. This man is lame from birth. They look intently at him. He's looking intently at them. There's that same phrase that keeps showing up all over the book of Acts. It's starting to bug me. I hope it's bugging you. Because it's like, I wonder what it really means. Why is everyone looking intently? It's like they're 2-year-olds. Wow. And there's a good sense to that too, but there's also sometimes a sense where 2-year-olds start asking why, and they don't quit. But here, Paul heals someone through a word. Now that's extraordinary. Jesus doesn't do that very often even himself. Just heal someone because he said so. Usually Jesus lays hands on them and prays for them. Usually there's more to it. Paul is just like, get up. Be like, yeah, Lord, okay, maybe. Would you please mind standing? Right? If you were praying for someone and someone was crippled from birth, I don't think I'd look at them and just be like, get up. You're like, but what if they're not healed? And you told them to get up and you like lifted them up and then they fall down and now, their insurance company is mad at you. But there's a sense that they're healed by words, and words carry divine power. Even the word of Paul carries the authority of Jesus. It's still Jesus who does the miracle. It's still God who's at work. It's not Paul or Barnabas. Oh, this is the funny one. So they noted that he had the faith to be healed. So they heal this crippled man. He has the faith to be healed. And what happens? They're there, and the story tells us something that I think is humorous. Paul and Barnabas are not laughing. The priest of Zeus comes, right? And he marches out this procession from town with animals to sacrifice to them. I think that would be funny. Be like, where did I go wrong? This is not what I imagined. It's not like they bring food out to feed them. They don't carry water out to make sure they're not thirsty. They bring animals out to sacrifice to them. What are you doing?
They thought they were gods.
They thought they were gods, but it's just sort of, I don't know, if I was standing by watching this, I would probably laugh. Something happened, that there was some miscommunication here. Something didn't go right. Because, to me, it just is striking as funny. It's like when you send your husband to the grocery store and you ask for salt and he brought you back sugar and added it to your recipe. And then it's like, well, honey, look at what I did for you. And you look at the counter and you see what it is and did you put that in my soup? Oh yeah, your recipe called for it. It was like tablespoons. That's sugar. Yeah, that's what you wanted, isn't it? No, I wanted salt. Right? Does that not happen sometimes? And it really makes you frustrated in the moment, but if you're watching it, it's actually pretty funny. Shoot, we're running out of time. You guys take too long. Right? It's always your fault. It's never me. It says that when they encounter this crippled man, he has the faith to be healed. And this, I think, causes problems for a lot of people today. Because a lot of Protestants, a lot of people would read this and think that if you are not healed, it means you don't have faith, or you don't have enough faith. And so to fix the problem, you need to have more faith. Who has that put in the center of the universe? Me, myself, and I. That it's all about me, that it becomes a form of pride. And it's fascinating that you encounter this all the time. You'll have people who will say, well, this is in the scriptures and you just need to have more faith, and if you have the faith to be healed, then God will heal you. But at the end of the day, what it does is it actually makes it all about them. And it doesn't ask, what is best? What is God doing? If God doesn't heal you, does that mean He doesn't like you? Does that mean it's something about your faith? Joseph died. Mary died. Did they die because they didn't have faith? No. At least I wouldn't say that about Joseph and Mary. There's people today that have a beautiful faith, that have tremendous faith in the midst of very challenging or difficult diseases or illnesses. And you could argue, it seems like they would have the faith to be healed and God doesn't heal them. Is that their fault? I would say no. In fact, that belief can be really, really dangerous because you turn it into something that's all about you. Well, I need to have more faith because it says, like, Paul and Barnabas saw that he had faith to be healed, and so he did, and he was healed, and that should work for me too. I think that causes huge problems. First of all, because physical healing in this world is not always the best answer. I mean, I have some friends that I'm pretty sure will discover that they went to heaven because their 7-year-old daughter got the flu and died. And it was a horrible thing in their life. And did they like it? No, it was awful. And it was terrible. But it helped them clean up their marriage. It helped them take seriously the grace and the work of God. It brought them to prayer. And the effects of it now continue to multiply. It was a bad event, and the ripples of grace have continued to flow out. They're able to speak to other parents, and they're able to share their story and how they've come to faith, and on and on and on and on. Did they pray for their daughter to be healed? Yes. Was their daughter a faithful Christian? Yes. But maybe her healing in this world wasn't the best answer. And that's something that we have to wrestle with. This is something that I think about, now, like dealing with heart things and going to Mayo and all of this. There's a possibility, it's relatively remote, that it doesn't go well, or that things actually do get worse. There's a possibility some people, they go in to do these surgeries and their heart shuts off and that's it. It just doesn't like things inside of it, and you have to wrestle with that people pray for healing. I know lots of you pray for me and would be terrified if it happened, but it doesn't mean God didn't answer your prayers if things don't go well. Now, I hope they do. Don't get me wrong. I'm really hopeful that, stuff sorts out and that the Lord is able to work through it in that way. But I think, we have to realize that sometimes maybe God does answer a prayer and give someone a gift of salvation, but they die in this world. Sometimes God does afflict us or allow us to be afflicted with problems that we have to face that don't go away. Some of you might discover that you end up in heaven because of arthritis. And you certainly didn't think of that when you were here on earth. Like, oh Lord, I'm so thankful that my joints ache because it's bringing me along the road to heaven. I'd be surprised if you said that. I would be shocked. Now, you can meet people who get there. You can arrive in those kind of places, but it takes a lot of practice. So they think that gods have come down to us in human form. Now, part of this could be even, I think it's even funnier, because they're speaking Lycaonian. I have no idea what Lycaonian is. I have no idea if it's a relative of Greek, like if Paul and Barnabas even understood them. But that would almost be funnier, because it's like Paul and Barnabas are preaching, and then they heal this guy, and then they have this procession out, and they all of a sudden realize that the people who were listening and looking at them hadn't understood a word of what they said. Like, you sat here for 2 hours listening to me and you didn't hear a word. No, you look nice though. You smile a lot. You waved your arms. I mean, it tells us that they were doing some of this in Lycaonian. So it's very, very possible that there was this massive misunderstanding. Or maybe you have these things in languages, they call them faux amis, false friends, where a word in one language means one thing and it means a different thing in another language. And so you say it thinking that you're saying the same thing and really you're not. They're false friends. And it's really, really funny. So Paul and Barnabas tear their garments, maybe because they finally realized that people didn't understand them. And so they can't just tell them this isn't what you're supposed to do. They have to do something. I get the impression a little bit that Paul's ripping his clothes off and running around and waving his arms and stop! No, take the ox away. No more chickens. Leave their feathers on them. And then he does give a speech, and maybe he had to be translated or maybe something. He talks about coming to worship the living God, that there's a time of forgiveness and allowance for these things happening. But he notes that living things, the entire world bears witness to the grace and the work of God. That you're invited into this religion, you're invited into this faith. They don't accept gifts, they're not in this for profit. Paul and Barnabas could have said, well, don't offer the sacrifices, but we'll keep all the stuff. That was very nice of you. You brought us food for the next month. There are some in our modern world who are not very good preachers, who live very problematic lifestyles. People that are the pastor of a large church and have a private jet and belong to the golf club and, have a home in the Bahamas. I don't think that's quite the lifestyle that Jesus lived or Paul and Barnabas lived. This time, Paul actually does get stoned, and they drag him out of the city because they think he's dead. You have to be pretty darn dead to think that. I mean, was he moving? Did he have a pulse? Was he bloodied? He's probably on the ground, and it notes that they drug him. Grabbed his arm and just pulled him. That's pretty intense. That's not so pleasant. And he has kind of an almost miraculous survival. After he's actually stoned, they decide to leave. Big surprise there. And I think this had some impacts on them. It's a sign of increasing opposition. Well, shoot, we'll have to pick up at the end of chapter 14 next week. That's the way it goes. Yeah.